"He'll never choose you," she said, smiling for the cameras. I felt the air inside that church thicken. The guests laughed softly, unaware that a single sentence had just split my world open. My name is Claire, and at 52, I stood beside my younger sister, acting like a proud maid of honor while she married the man I once loved. The organ echoed above us, drowning the truth I couldn't say out loud. For a moment, I let myself drift into the warmth I'd known all my life. I remembered Christmas dinners where our father carved the turkey, where my sister would steal extra pie slices and make me swear not to tell. I saw us as little girls, braiding each other's hair on the porch, laughing until the sun went down. The smell of lilac perfume clung to my dress. It was our mother's favorite, and somehow it made me feel safe, even here. The candles flickered against the stained glass, painting us both in borrowed holiness. I told myself to breathe, to keep smiling, to be the older, wiser one who wouldn't ruin the moment. But then she leaned closer, veil brushing my shoulder, and whispered again, softer this time, "He'll never choose you." The organ covered the sound, but I heard it clear as a bell. My throat burned. I smiled anyway because that's what I'd been taught to do, to keep the peace, to hold my dignity like armor. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," my hands shook around the bouquet. His hand lingered too long on her waist, and something cold slid through me. After the ceremony, the guests swarmed her in white petals and laughter. I stood off to the side, pretending to adjust my shoe. The photographer told us to gather for a family shot. I hesitated, then stepped back into the frame. When the flash went off, her hand rested on his chest, not just casually, but possessively. Later, that same photo appeared online. The caption read, "My miracle." It spread fast. Cousins, neighbors, church friends, all commented blessings and hearts. The image of their kiss was everywhere. I watched it from my phone in the back seat of my car, parked behind the church, and wondered when my life had become someone else's highlight reel. That evening, our family group chat buzzed with congratulations. My mother wrote, "God has rewarded her patience." I almost typed something, anything, but the words felt like stones. I deleted every draft. Then came a private message from my sister. "Don't make this about you again." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Around 9, the pastor called. "You did beautifully today," he said, his tone heavy. "It meant a lot that you stood by her." I asked, "Did you know?" Silence, then a soft sigh. "Claire, love is complicated. Try to forgive." His avoidance said everything. He had known for months. My hands trembled as I hung up. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and looked at the clock. 10:15 p.m. The kitchen light buzzed, flickering against the old photo of our parents hanging above the sink. I remembered my father's voice telling me, "Family is duty." Maybe that's why I stayed quiet so long. Maybe that's why I smiled through humiliation. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile at the altar, the veil trembling as she whispered. It replayed like a cruel lullaby. I kept thinking about how easily she'd turned love into power, and how everyone in that church had clapped for her victory. By midnight, the house was silent. I sat on my bed holding the printed photo from the wedding, tracing her hand on his chest. The paper felt rough, like it wanted to tell the truth. I thought of tearing it, burning it, anything, but I didn't. Instead, I placed it in the drawer beside my bed, a reminder of the cost of silence. I told myself it would pass, that maybe in time the pain would dull. But when I turned off the lamp, her voice echoed again, clear and merciless. "He'll never choose you." And for the first time, I understood it wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. That whisper followed me home like a curse. The picture hit our family chat before breakfast. My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, its vibration sharp enough to spill a little coffee from my mug. The image filled the screen, my sister in her white dress, lips pressed to his, sunlight spilling over them like a blessing. The caption read, "Finally found peace." The words turned in my stomach. Every comment below it was another nail in the coffin of my silence. You both deserve happiness. True love finds its way. What a beautiful couple. I scrolled until my thumb hurt. My coffee tasted metallic that morning. I tried to delete the app, but the photo stayed burned in my mind. The mug in my hand had a small crack near the rim, a hairline fracture I'd never noticed before. Somehow it felt fitting. My phone lit up again, this time a message from Lena, my oldest friend. "You okay?" she wrote. I typed back, "They're perfect together," then erased it before hitting send. I didn't want pity. I didn't want her to see what that picture had done to me. Around 10, Mom called. Her tone was too bright, like someone performing happiness. "Claire, have you seen the pictures? She looks radiant, doesn't she?" I murmured something polite. Then came the real reason for her call. "Be happy for her, dear. Don't let old feelings ruin what's meant to be." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. "Old feelings," she said, as if love had an expiration date. When the call ended, I stared at the clock ticking above the stove. It was 10:32 a.m. I wished it would stop moving. By noon, the entire family group chat had turned into a celebration thread. A cousin posted, "God finally gave her peace after all those years." No one mentioned me. I felt like a ghost reading messages about people who were still alive. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the refrigerator humming. Steady, indifferent, endless. Lena called that afternoon. "I saw the post," she said softly. "That must hurt." I tried to laugh. "Hurt? No, it's fine. Everyone's happy." "You don't have to pretend with me," she said. Her voice cracked, and I could hear the echo of old summers, our laughter by the lake, the smell of sunscreen, her arm looped through mine. We'd promised each other once we'd never let anyone make us small. I guess I broke that promise first. Later, I walked to the corner store for bread and milk. The cashier smiled and said, "Saw your sister's wedding online? What a fairy tale." I nodded, forced a smile, and paid with the few dollars I had left in my purse. My hands shook as I put the change in my coat pocket. The coins clinked against the old house key, the only thing still mine. That night, I couldn't stop replaying the wedding video that kept surfacing on social media. I didn't click it, just watched the silent preview as it looped endlessly. The pastor's voice played in my head. "Speak now or forever. Hold your peace." I almost laughed. Forever, it seemed, had already begun. Around 8, I sat on the couch with the lights off. The glow of my phone lit the room just enough to make the shadows feel alive. A message popped up from an unknown number. A cropped photo of me standing behind them at the altar, my face barely visible. The caption said, "Some people never learn to move on." My chest went cold. I deleted it, but the damage was done. Whoever sent it wanted me quiet, ashamed, erased. And for a moment, I almost let them. The screen dimmed again. My reflection looked hollow, like someone I didn't recognize. I whispered to the empty room. They wanted my silence to look like guilt. Then I turned the phone face down, letting the darkness win for the night. He called it just paperwork. I knew better. He stood in my doorway that afternoon, dressed too neatly for someone pretending this was routine. He smiled, the kind of smile that asked for trust, but delivered warning. "Your father's estate just needs final signatures," he said, handing me an envelope. His tone was casual, practiced. I felt my stomach tighten. Something in his eyes told me this wasn't a favor. It was a move. The paper inside smelled faintly of ink and dust, a mix that always reminded me of old records and things you can't undo. I unfolded the document slowly. My name was gone, entirely erased. He pointed at the empty space, pretending not to notice. "It's simpler this way. You've done enough for the family." My throat dried. "You mean nothing comes to me?" He chuckled. "Claire, you've never cared about money." I said, "That's not the point." He smiled again, the way a man does when he thinks he's already won. My sister entered from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "It's fair," she said, her voice flat. "You took care of them while we worked. It evens out." She spoke like this was mercy. I stared at her, realizing the wedding had never been only about love. It was leverage. Marriage used as a doorway to control. I wanted to shout, to demand why she'd chosen betrayal over honesty. Instead, I said quietly, "Dad trusted me to divide things fairly." Her eyes narrowed. "Then be fair." After they left, the house felt colder. I placed the envelope on the table and ran my fingers over the embossed letterhead. The paper was thick, expensive. He'd spared no cost proving my worthlessness. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. It was just past 6. I sat there in the dim light, thinking about how money always reveals the truth we try to hide. Later that night, I opened Father's old chest in the attic. The air was heavy with cedar and dust. I found a faded folder marked with his handwriting. Inside was a short note dated a month before he passed. It said, "I trust Claire to divide the estate with fairness and heart." His signature was steady, strong, unlike the printed one on the new will. My hands trembled as I compared them under the lamp. The difference was clear. The warmth in one, the cold precision in the other. At 9:00 p.m., I called Lena. She answered on the first ring. "Something's wrong," I said. She listened as I described the visit, the envelope, the missing name. "Get a copy," she said firmly. "Don't confront them yet. Just secure proof before they change more." Her voice grounded me. "I can help if you need it." I looked at the document again. The paper was already creased from how tightly I'd held it. "They think I'll just sign," I said. "Then don't," she replied. I didn't sleep much that night. The house creaked in small, tired sounds. I poured myself a glass of water and looked at the clock. It was 11:45. Every shadow felt alive. I realized then this wasn't just about inheritance. It was about rewriting history, about control dressed up as generosity, the kind of theft that comes wrapped in family smiles. The next morning, I placed the envelope in my desk drawer under an old photograph of Father standing in the garden. His pen was in his shirt pocket, the same one I used to see him sign checks for our school fees, grocery bills, even my sister's college tuition. All those years, he'd trusted both of us. I whispered, "I won't let them erase you." By noon, I'd already called an accountant I knew distantly, someone who used to manage small estates. I told him I needed quiet advice, nothing official yet. He agreed to meet in 2 days, no charge for the first look. "Just bring everything," he said. That was the first time in weeks I felt a sliver of control. I ended the call and exhaled slowly. The coffee on the counter had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. Bitter, like truth left too long unattended. When my phone buzzed again that evening, it was a message from my sister. "Don't overthink it," she wrote. "We're family." I looked at those words for a long time, then turned the phone face down. I signed nothing, but they acted like I had. "Why do you need the key?" she snapped. Her tone was sharper than usual, like a door slamming before I could speak. The words echoed in the empty hall of our old house, the one that still smelled faintly of polish and dust. I ran my hand along Father's desk, tracing the grooves he'd carved into the wood with years of writing. The drawer beneath my palm was locked tight. "Because I think he left something unfinished," I said. She crossed her arms. "It has nothing to do with you." Then she left, her heels clicking across the floor, each step louder than the last. Mara, the housekeeper, lingered in the doorway. She'd served our family for 30 years, quiet and loyal, the kind of woman who saw everything but rarely spoke. "Your father told me never to let anyone touch that drawer except you," she whispered. I looked at her, startled. "You're sure?" She nodded. "He said it was for you after." I waited until I heard the front door close before kneeling under the desk. The smell of old paper and cedar filled my nose. Beneath the drawer, taped to the underside, I found a small brass key. The lock turned with a dry click. Dust rose in a soft cloud, catching the afternoon light from the window. Inside the drawer, I found a stack of receipts, a broken fountain pen, and one half-burned letter. My heart raced. The edges were blackened, brittle. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. Father's. Only fragments remained legible. Tampering with accounts, unauthorized withdrawals, legal exposure. My throat tightened. The rest had turned to ash. A car door slammed outside. I froze. My sister's voice called out, "Mara, did you finish packing the upstairs boxes?" I shoved the letter inside my coat pocket and locked the drawer again. "Almost done," Mara replied, steady as ever. When my sister walked in, her eyes went straight to the desk. "You didn't find anything, did you?" she asked. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing you didn't already take," I said. Her expression flickered, just for a second, before she looked away. "The fire last year destroyed a lot," she murmured. "I guess some things were meant to be forgotten." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about that letter. I laid it flat on my kitchen table under a lamp, studying each word, each stroke of Father's pen. The ink had bled near the edges, but one phrase stood out clear. Trust compromised. I tried to imagine who he meant, a mistake, a warning, or something deliberate. The smell of smoke still clung to the paper, faint but persistent, like memory refusing to fade. At 9:10 p.m., I called Mara. "That fire," I said, "the one during the renovations, was it in the study?" She hesitated. "Mostly. Your sister said it started from an old wire behind the desk." I waited. "And you believed her?" Silence. Then softly, "I wanted to." After we hung up, I sat there staring at the letter. I remembered Father's voice, calm but firm, the way he'd always remind us that honesty was the only inheritance worth leaving behind. And now, it seemed, even that was under attack. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister. "Hope you didn't waste your time at the house. Nothing left there." The nerve of her. I locked my phone and slid the letter into a sealed folder. Tomorrow, I would take it to someone who could tell me if the signature was real. Before bed, I opened the window to let in air. The night breeze carried a faint trace of burnt wood. I thought I'd imagined it until I noticed a thin smear of ash on my fingers, the same one I'd felt on the letter. I wiped it on a tissue, but it left a mark on my skin, gray and stubborn. Lying awake, I wondered how much my sister had already destroyed, how much of our history had gone up in smoke. Maybe the drawer wasn't the only thing she'd locked. Maybe she'd sealed away the truth itself. I closed my eyes and whispered, "The letter wasn't all that burned." The card arrived smelling of perfume and power. I knew before opening it that it was hers. The envelope was heavy, embossed, the kind you send when you want people to feel small. Inside, gold lettering announced a charity dinner, celebrating family unity and the spirit of giving. The location? The same church where they had married just weeks ago. I almost laughed. My sister never wasted a stage once she'd claimed it. I set the card on the table. The faint perfume still clung to my fingers, sweet but suffocating. The irony hit me first. They were honoring those who supported aging parents. My name was nowhere on the program list. Not once. I'd spent 6 years caring for our father through his final illness, selling my own jewelry to keep his medication going when insurance ran out. She had visited twice, but now she was being honored as the dedicated daughter. I read it again, slower, as if repetition might dull the insult. It didn't. At 6:45 that evening, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Harding stood there, smiling kindly. She'd been the church elder since before I could drive. "You got your invitation, dear?" she asked. "Yes," I said, holding it up. "Perfume and all." She laughed softly. "That girl of yours always did like a little spectacle." I nodded. "Will you come?" she asked. "It would mean something. To some of us, at least." Her voice carried quiet sympathy. I sighed. "I'll come, but not for her." By the time I arrived, the hall was already glowing with soft light. Round tables draped in linen, silverware catching every flicker of the candles. The smell of roasted meat hung in the air. Every face turned as I entered. Whispers moved quicker than the choir's piano notes. My sister stood near the podium, radiant in red, her husband by her side. She waved like a queen addressing her court. "So glad you made it," she said when I reached her. "We didn't want you to feel left out." I forced a smile. "How kind." Halfway through dinner, the pastor began reading names of those being honored. I waited for mine. It never came. Instead, he praised the couple whose generosity set an example for us all. Applause filled the room. I watched Mrs. Harding across the table, her brow furrowed. When the noise faded, she leaned toward me. "You were the one who cared for your father, right?" I nodded slowly. "Then why is her name on the award?" she whispered. My throat tightened. I stared at my sister, glass raised, smiling as if every lie tasted sweet. I looked down at the table. The candle nearest me trembled slightly, its flame bending but not dying. The silver reflected its flicker in small waves across the cutlery. It looked almost like breathing. I could hear the scrape of forks, the polite chatter. My sister's voice cut through it all. "Family is everything," she said to the crowd. "We owe our peace to forgiveness." People nodded, touched. I wanted to stand up to shout what she had done, but I didn't. I waited. The timing would come. Later in the restroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The lights were too bright. I whispered to myself, "They're using faith to rewrite truth." My lipstick had faded. I didn't bother fixing it. When I stepped out again, Mrs. Harding caught me near the door. "You deserve better," she said softly. "Everyone here knows who really cared for him." Her words were a small anchor in a sea of performance. I thanked her, though my voice barely worked. When dessert arrived, I watched my sister take the stage again. "This award," she said, holding a plaque engraved with her name, "is not just for us. It's for all who stood by family through hard times." She looked straight at me as she said it. The crowd clapped. I sat still, my hands folded, my smile gone. Every cheer sounded like a hammer driving the lie deeper. Afterward, as people began to leave, she stopped me near the door. "You didn't congratulate me," she said lightly. "You seemed busy," I replied. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she whispered, her breath warm with wine. "This was for both of us." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, this was for show." Her grin faded. "Don't start, Claire. Not here." I stepped closer. "You've already started it." Outside, the night air hit colder than I expected. The wind carried the faint smell of her perfume from the invitation still tucked in my purse. I pulled it out, tore it clean down the middle, and let the pieces scatter onto the pavement. The church bells rang behind me, 8 sharp notes marking the hour. I whispered, "I'm done pretending." I wasn't part of their show anymore. "Always keep a copy," Lena had said. Her voice echoed in my head as I sat in the waiting area of the law office, clutching the folder so tightly my knuckles went white. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the low hum of a copier filled the silence. I kept staring at the paper inside, the photocopy of Father's original will. I'd made it weeks ago, on instinct, before handing anything over to my sister's husband. Back then, it had just felt like caution. Now, it felt like survival. When they called my name, I stood too quickly. My legs trembled, but I forced myself forward. The clerk behind the counter adjusted his glasses and held out a hand. "You said you had a document for review?" I nodded and placed the copy in front of him. The machine beside us hummed again, steady and mechanical. He compared the 2 pages, his eyes moving back and forth. "This is different." I leaned in. "Different how?" He pointed at the signature line. "The original file on record shows a scanned signature. This one, your copy, it's ink. Pen pressure, ink variance, natural flow." My stomach turned. "So it's real?" He nodded slowly. "It can be verified, but it'll take a few weeks. Are you prepared for that?" "I've waited long enough," I said. Outside, the afternoon light stung my eyes. I sat on the steps and called Lena. "He confirmed it," I said. "The signature's real." She didn't sound surprised. "I figured. Keep calm. They'll try to scare you first. That's how people like that work. They bluff before they break. I asked, "What if they already know?" She paused. "Then they're desperate. That's when you document everything." Her words steadied me. I pulled a notebook from my purse and wrote down the date, time, and exactly what the clerk had said. I decided I wouldn't rely on memory anymore. At 5:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from my sister. "Dad wanted fairness. Stop twisting history." My fingers froze above the screen. The wording was deliberate, too polished, like something rehearsed by someone else. I typed, "Fairness doesn't erase proof," then deleted it. I'd learned by now that silence unsettled her more. Still, I saved the message in my folder. If she was nervous enough to text, she knew I had something. That night, I couldn't sleep. The copy lay on my kitchen counter under a small desk lamp. The soft hum of the fridge filled the silence. I traced the ink on Father's signature with one finger. The slight indentation on the paper, the curve of the C, it was his hand, his rhythm. I'd watched him sign documents my whole life. Tuition checks, insurance papers, even permission slips. I could recognize that signature anywhere. I whispered to the paper, "You trusted me. I won't let them erase that." Around midnight, I heard a car slow outside my house. Headlights swept across the living room wall, then faded. I stood by the window, heart pounding. Nothing, just quiet. But unease lingered. I went back to the counter, placed the photocopy inside a manila envelope, and slid it into the drawer under the phone book. I'd make another copy tomorrow, one for Lena, one for safekeeping. "Always keep a copy," she'd said. Now I understood why. By morning, the world looked unchanged, but everything felt off. The mailbox outside leaned slightly open, like someone hadn't closed it all the way. I frowned. The lid was bent back farther than usual. When I reached inside, envelopes were scattered and damp from last night's rain. Bills, a grocery flyer, a notice from the bank, nothing missing, but everything disturbed. My heart sank as I noticed a faint shoe print on the wet pavement near the box. Someone had been here, someone who didn't belong. I carried the mail inside, dried it carefully, then sat at the table staring at the folder again. Every instinct told me to panic, but Lena's words echoed steady in my mind. Document everything. I pulled out my notebook and wrote it down. Tuesday morning, mailbox broken into. Nothing taken yet. I underlined yet. I didn't know what scared me more, that they might take what I had, or that they might already know where to look. Either way, one thing was clear. This wasn't about family anymore. It was about control, and I wasn't surrendering again. The next morning, someone broke into my mailbox. My mailbox hung open like a wound. The metal flap dangled, edges bent inward, as if someone had forced it. I ran my fingers along the rim and felt the jagged edges catch my skin. The envelope that had held the lawyer's correspondence, the one about the will, was gone. Bills and flyers still sat there, untouched, like props left behind. But the thing that mattered most had vanished. My stomach turned cold. It wasn't theft, it was a message. I called the police. By the time Officer Evan arrived, the afternoon light was already fading. His flashlight swept over the broken lock and the ground below. Metal shards glinted in the grass. He took notes slowly, looking more bored than alarmed. "Probably kids," he said. "Mailbox vandalism's common this time of year." I folded my arms. "Kids don't steal legal envelopes." He shrugged. "Hard to say without proof. You sure it wasn't misplaced?" I held up the empty slot. "Does that look misplaced to you?" His eyes flicked toward my porch light. "You should install cameras," he said. "Sometimes the idea of being watched keeps them away." Then he closed his notebook. "We'll file the report, but honestly, these things go nowhere." His flashlight beam lingered on the torn edge of the box before he walked back to his car. I could still hear the gravel crunching under his boots long after he drove away. My phone buzzed. A message from my sister. So dramatic. No greeting, no context, just that. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. My heart thudded against my ribs. She knew. She always knew when to twist the knife. I replied with one word: noted. Then I screenshot it and saved it to my growing folder of evidence. Every word, every timestamp, every silence, I was documenting it all. Inside, the house felt too quiet. The ticking of the kitchen clock echoed through the hall. I sat at the table with the flashlight Officer Evan had left by accident. Its beam rolled across the wood surface, landing on the corner of the folder that held Father's photocopy. I touched it, just to make sure it was still there. The paper felt dry, fragile, but solid. Proof still existed. Truth still had weight. But fear was louder tonight. At 11:40 p.m., I heard a sound outside, metal scraping against metal. I froze. It came again, softer this time. I turned off the kitchen light and stood near the window. The porch was empty, just shadows moving with the breeze. Still, I double-checked every door and window, then added another note to my record. Noises outside. Unverified. Maintain vigilance. My handwriting shook slightly. By midnight, sleep felt impossible. I sat up in bed, staring at the faint light spilling from the hallway. I kept replaying what Officer Evan had said. Without proof, I can't act. Proof. The word burned. As if I hadn't spent my whole life being told to stay quiet unless I could prove it. Proof for neglect. Proof for betrayal. Proof for every invisible wound this family had inflicted. But this time, I had it. On paper, in ink, with dates and signatures. That's why they were afraid. I got up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. The faucet squeaked. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered. Tired eyes, hair pulled loose, determination buried under exhaustion. I whispered, "They won't win." Saying it out loud made it real, even if only for a moment. At 3:05 a.m., my phone lit up again. Another message, same number. "You're making this ugly," she wrote. I didn't respond. I saved it too. Then I wrote another entry in my notebook. Intimidation escalating. Maintain composure. The act of writing steadied my hands. I realized fear was their weapon, and I was the one still standing. The next morning, sunlight hit the mailbox like nothing had happened. The lock hung broken, but the threat still lingered, invisible. I touched the cold metal, then turned back toward the house. I wasn't the same woman who'd waited for fairness. I'd stopped expecting rescue. Now, I was preparing for war, the kind fought in silence, one document at a time. They wanted fear to replace truth. He arrived uninvited, holding a Bible and concern. His car idled in my driveway, as if he wasn't sure whether to come in or drive away. When I opened the door, he smiled too softly. "I just wanted to check on you," he said. "The congregation's been worried." The sight of the cross pin on his lapel caught the morning light, flashing briefly before settling into shadow. I stepped aside. "Then come in, Pastor." We sat in the living room. The air was thick with the faint scent of old coffee and unease. He set the Bible on the table, gently, like it could shatter. "You've been through so much," he began. "And I know there's tension within the family, but forgiveness heals. It brings peace." I folded my hands in my lap, forcing a calm tone. "Would you tell a thief that too?" His smile faltered. "Family wounds destroy churches," he said, lowering his eyes to the floor. I realized then he wasn't here for me. He was here for them. He cleared his throat. "Your sister came to service last Sunday. She asked for prayers. She said she worries about you." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Worries about me? Or about what I might say?" His eyes darted toward the Bible. "Words carry weight, and people talk. It's best not to let anger take root." I stared at him. Anger? Or truth? Silence filled the space between us. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. Finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. "I wrote something," he said. "It's my sermon for next week. I'd like you to read it." He slid it across the table. I didn't touch it at first. "What's it about?" I asked. "Reconciliation," he said, almost whispering. "The strength to forgive, even when others can't see their wrongs." My jaw tightened. "So, forgiveness without accountability?" He hesitated. "Sometimes peace requires surrender." That word, surrender, sat between us like an accusation. I looked at the note again. The paper trembled slightly in his hand before I picked it up. The handwriting was neat but uneven, as though written in a hurry or under pressure. The letterhead bore the church crest. The final line caught my eye. "Forgiveness brings closure to all sides." I felt something shift inside me. Closure for whom? For the one silenced or the one protected? I asked quietly, "Did my sister ask you to bring this?" He paused, then said, "She only wanted healing." The lie was too polished to be innocent. I pushed the paper back toward him. "You can tell her I'm done praying for fairness." His eyes softened. "Don't turn this into bitterness." I leaned forward. "Bitterness is pretending everything's fine when it isn't." He stood slowly, adjusting his jacket. "I'll keep you in my prayers," he said. "You don't need to," I replied. "I already know where I stand." He picked up his Bible, holding it close like a shield, and walked to the door. For a moment, his shadow stretched across the hallway wall, long and warped, like a confession he couldn't say out loud. When the door shut, I sat back down and stared at the folded note he'd left behind. My reflection caught in the glass frame behind it, a faint image, but steady. I realized this was never about peace. It was about control dressed as virtue. They wanted me to soften so they could move on without consequence. Forgiveness wasn't faith to them. It was strategy. I unfolded the note again, tracing the trembling ink. He'd written it with hesitation, not conviction. That guilt was proof enough. I tore the paper in half, then into quarters, until only fragments remained. The sound of tearing was sharper than I expected. It felt like reclaiming my own silence. Outside, church bells rang in the distance. For years that sound had comforted me. Now it only reminded me how easily morality can be weaponized. I stood by the window, watching the pastor's car disappear down the road. I whispered, "You can't pray away deceit." That afternoon, I wrote in my notebook, "No more waiting for approval. No more asking for permission to speak." Every line steadied me further. Forgiveness became their weapon. Truth would be mine. "Keep your phone recording," Lena whispered. Her voice was low but firm, the kind that didn't invite hesitation. I slipped my phone into my purse, camera side down, mic open. The small red light blinked once, then disappeared beneath the flap. Across the table, my sister arrived late. Expensive perfume, louder than her apology. "Traffic," she said, smiling as if we were still a family that met for lunches instead of battles. We sat by the window of the restaurant, the hum of conversations around us blended with the clinking of silverware. A waiter poured water into our glasses, the ice catching the light before sinking out of sight. My sister leaned forward. "You won't win," she said softly. "He works with the firm now. You should stop wasting your time." I forced a polite laugh. "I didn't realize fairness was a waste." She smirked. "Fairness is for people who don't have lawyers." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but kept my expression still. "You forged his signature," I said, testing her reaction. She didn't flinch, just sipped her drink. "You call it forgery," she said. "I call it protecting what's mine." Her laughter followed, sharp and casual, cutting through the room like glass. The sound filled the air, and my recording. She kept talking, careless in her confidence. "Dad was losing his memory, and you know it. You're the one who let him sign anything that was put in front of him. I just made sure it went where it should have gone." She dabbed her lips with a napkin, as if she hadn't just confessed to stealing our father's will. I kept nodding, pretending to listen. Inside, I was counting every word. Every syllable was currency now, proof worth more than money. "You think this will stay quiet?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Quiet?" Oh, it'll stay quiet if you keep your pride in check. Her eyes flicked toward the purse. You always liked keeping things tidy. Maybe this time, let it go messy. I smiled faintly. Maybe I will. When the bill came, she didn't even reach for it. The total flashed $82.50, and I paid without a word. That was always her pattern. Make the mess, leave the cleanup. I waited until she was gone before pulling out my phone. The red timer was still counting. I pressed stop. My hands shook slightly as I saved the file. It wasn't just evidence. It was freedom wrapped in sound waves. That evening, Lena came over. We sat in the living room, the same folder of papers spread out on the table between us. The phone rested on top, like a loaded truth. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. She pressed play. My sister's voice filled the room. Calm, confident, cruel. Each word landed heavier than the last. By the time the laughter came, Lena had covered her mouth. We listened through to the end, the silence after stretching like a held breath. Lena spoke first. "This is enough." Her tone carried both relief and disbelief. I nodded, eyes still fixed on the screen. "It has to be." The weight I'd been carrying for months began to shift. Not gone, but moving. I could feel the tremor of justice starting to rise. Faint, but real. "Tomorrow," I said quietly. "I'll file the report." Lena looked at me, studying the determination that must have shown on my face. "You're sure?" I met her eyes. She's been sure of her lies long enough. It's my turn to be sure of the truth. I replayed the last few seconds again, letting the echo of my sister's laugh fill the room one more time. It didn't hurt this time. It clarified. Proof wasn't just what you could show, it was what you refused to hide. For the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt prepared. That night, before bed, I placed the phone beside the folder and stared at it under the lamplight. The two things that could finally set me free: paper and sound. I whispered to myself, he always said truth doesn't need witnesses, but maybe it does. Tomorrow, I'd file the report. The courthouse smelled like dust and fear. The marble floor echoed every footstep as I walked toward the hearing room, clutching the folder that had become my armor. Inside it were the photocopy of the will and the recording that had kept me awake for nights. The air felt heavy, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Lena sat behind me in the second row. She gave a small nod. I nodded back. The officer entered first, stern, composed, neutral by design. My sister followed soon after, dressed in beige, her lawyer close beside her. They looked confident, rehearsed. I didn't look away. "Case 4127, the clerk said. "Estate review, preliminary hearing." My palms were damp, but I spoke clearly when called. "Forward." "I have additional evidence," I said, placing the folder on the table. The officer raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Her lawyer jumped in fast. "Objection, Your Honor. These materials were not part of the initial submission." His tone was smooth, polished. The officer turned to me. "You're submitting these now?" "Yes," I said. "They confirm forgery of the signature and intent to mislead." I pulled out the copy first, the one with the ink still visible under close light, then the USB drive. "This contains an audio recording," I said, "between my sister and myself." The officer gestured for it to be played. The moment the first few seconds played, the room shifted. Her laughter filled the speakers. Casual, careless, undeniable. "You call it forgery. I call it protecting what's mine." Then silence. Every person in that room turned toward her. Even her lawyer froze for half a second before leaning in, whispering something urgent. The officer leaned forward. "Is that you speaking?" he asked. My sister hesitated too long. That pause said more than any denial could. "I don't recall," she finally said. The officer's pen scratched across his notepad. "Noted," he said quietly. For the first time since this began, she wasn't in control. Her shoulders stiffened. Her hands twisted the edge of her sleeve. I could see the calculation in her eyes, the one that used to win every argument, every family dinner. But this wasn't our kitchen table. Here, her charm had no currency. Her lawyer tried again. That recording could be fabricated. I met his gaze. Then have it verified. I'm not afraid of the truth. The officer nodded. We will authenticate the file and the signature copy. This hearing is adjourned pending verification. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. That sound stayed in my chest like a heartbeat. As I gathered my papers, I saw her glance toward me. No smirk, no false pity, just quiet panic. For a split second, I almost pitied her. Then I remembered every time she'd told me to move on. Every message meant to make me doubt what I knew. The pity vanished. Outside the courthouse, the air felt clearer. Reporters waited by the steps, holding microphones, cameras flashing in bursts. Someone had leaked the story. The estate dispute was now public. One of them called my sister's name. She turned away, hand raised to block her face. The same woman who used to chase attention couldn't stand the lens now. I walked past her without a word. A reporter called to me instead. "Ma'am, do you think you'll win?" I paused. "I think the truth already did." Lena caught up beside me. "You did it," she said quietly. I exhaled for the first time in hours. "It's not over yet," I said, "but she can't smile for the cameras anymore." We walked down the courthouse steps together, the afternoon sun spilling across the pavement. For once, it didn't feel harsh, it felt earned. The same church hosted a family unity brunch. The invitation came folded inside the weekly bulletin, its gold lettering pretending kindness. I almost didn't go. But Lena said, "You should. People deserve to see the truth standing." So I ironed a plain dress, brought a store-bought pie, and walked into the same hall where I'd once watched my father sing hymns with pride. The air carried a faint warmth from the kitchen, eggs, toast, and forced civility. The tables were long this time, covered with white cloths and matching napkins. I recognized faces that had once turned away in gossip. Some smiled too quickly, pretending this was about reconciliation. My sister sat at the far end beside an empty chair that had been reserved for her husband. The space beside her looked like a ghost sat there. I took a seat near Mrs. Harding, the elder who had watched me grow up. Her hand found mine beneath the tablecloth. "Steady," she whispered. I nodded, pretending to adjust my plate. The pastor stood near the pulpit. "We're gathered," he said, "to heal wounds and restore unity." His voice echoed softly through the hall. He held a printed paper, folded in half. "Before we bless the meal, a short message will be read, submitted for the bulletin." I felt my pulse rise. He unfolded the paper and began reading. "Apologies for misunderstanding over estate matters. Families may differ in how they remember, but we all seek peace." The words hung in the air, polished and empty. My sister kept her eyes down, stirring her coffee though it was already cold. A few people shifted in their seats. Others stared at their plates, unsure whether to clap or pray. The pastor hesitated, then added, "This statement was shared in goodwill." He folded the page again, set it on the table beside him, and said, "Let's eat." Plates began to move, silverware clinked against ceramic, and conversation started in soft, uneasy murmurs. No one said her name. No one said mine. But everyone knew who the note was for. Mrs. Harding leaned close. "Truth has a sound," she whispered. "And that wasn't it." I pressed my napkin into my lap, feeling its rough edge against my palm. "I know," I said, "but silence has one too." Across the room, my sister's eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. She tried to smile, but her lips faltered. She wasn't used to the weight of people not believing her. A man at her table asked where her husband was. "He's traveling," she said quickly. The lie slipped out smooth, practiced. But the woman beside her looked puzzled. "He was here last week," she said quietly. My sister's fork paused mid-air. The pastor's wife looked away. That's when it hit me. He hadn't just missed the brunch. He'd left. Lena had hinted days earlier that rumors were spreading about forged files and legal exposure. Apparently, even her allies were jumping ship. I looked around the table again. The same people who once avoided me now avoided her. Small justice maybe, but real. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Shame works best in silence. The meal dragged on. The sound of plates being set down and conversations being forced filled the air. Every clang of cutlery felt like punctuation to the lies that had been told. I barely touched my food. I just watched the empty chair next to my sister and thought about how it looked. So clean, so still, so final. It wasn't absence anymore. It was evidence. Mrs. Harding reached for her coffee. "You held your ground," she said softly. I smiled faintly. "I just stopped apologizing for standing." She nodded. "That's how peace really starts." As the pastor ended with a closing prayer, people began to gather their coats. My sister remained seated, pretending to check her phone. No one approached her this time. When I stood to leave, the napkin slid from my lap to the floor. I picked it up, folded it neatly, and set it beside my untouched plate. For a second, I looked toward her again. She didn't look up. Outside, the morning light felt cleaner than it had in months. The bells rang faintly in the distance. I walked toward the parking lot, Lena waiting by the car. She didn't ask how it went. She just smiled knowingly and handed me my coat. "You look lighter," she said. I exhaled. Maybe because I didn't carry her guilt this time. As we drove away, I looked once more through the window at that long table. The food was being cleared, chairs pushed in, napkins folded back into baskets. But one chair, hers, stayed empty, even when the food arrived. A brown envelope waited on my doorstep. It was thin, official, and heavier than it looked. The seal carried the same emblem I had seen on every notice, every reminder, every delay that had arrived these past months. I stood for a moment before picking it up, feeling the faint texture of wax where it closed. It was late afternoon, sunlight fading across the porch. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid to open something with my name on it. Inside was a single page, folded twice. The words were short, printed neatly. The court confirmed my father's original wishes. Half of the estate was restored to me. My throat tightened. Not joy, just a long, quiet relief that felt earned. I sat down by the door, the envelope still in my lap. The house was silent except for the steady hum of the refrigerator inside. I realized I hadn't heard silence like this since the hearing. Back then, it sounded like accusation. Now, it sounded like peace waiting to be recognized. Lena came by that evening bringing tea and 2 slices of cake. "You got it?" she asked. I nodded, handing her the paper. She read it once, then exhaled. "It's over." I smiled faintly. "Almost. I just need to stop waiting for her next move." We sat at the kitchen table where so many arguments had once started. "Do you feel lighter?" she asked. "More equal?" I thought for a moment. "Not equal," I said. "Just free." Later that night, I placed the envelope beside another letter, one I'd kept from my father's desk. It was the one he never finished, torn across the middle, his handwriting stopping mid-sentence. The smell of old paper and faint smoke lingered. That scent used to mean grief. Now, somehow, it meant closure. The contrast made me smile. It wasn't justice as people imagine it, loud and public. It was quiet, decent, and final. I took out my checkbook, something I hadn't used in months, and wrote a small check to Mara, the housekeeper who had stayed through the chaos. I wrote it slowly, carefully, wanting each stroke to matter. "For loyalty," I wrote on the memo line. Money once used to divide now bridged something. It didn't erase what was taken, but it redefined what remained. I placed it in an envelope of its own, sealing it gently with a finger pressed along the edge. Before bed, I cleared the dining table. The stack of legal documents that had once cluttered it was gone. Only the keychain my father had used sat there now, scratched but solid. I ran my thumb over the metal, thinking of all the times I'd seen it hanging from his belt. He had said once, "Everything worth keeping will find its way back to you." I hadn't believed it then. Now, I finally understood what he meant. The next morning, I walked to the post office to mail Mara's envelope. The clerk behind the counter recognized my name on the sender line. "Good news, I hope?" she asked, smiling. "Yes," I said. "For once it is." She stamped it and slid it into the outgoing bin. That small motion, the letter disappearing, felt like the last page of a long chapter closing. When I returned home, I left the brown envelope where I had found it, on the doorstep. It caught the morning light just long enough before the wind moved it slightly. I didn't pick it up again. I didn't need to. For the first time, the quiet in that house wasn't a reminder of loss. It was proof that something broken could still end right. The silence finally sounded peaceful. The locks had been changed, but the echoes remained. When I pushed open the front door, a faint draft carried the scent of new paint. The smell didn't sting. It calmed. For months, this house had stood like a wound I couldn't touch. Now it felt like a space waiting to breathe again. I stepped inside, key still warm from my palm, and let the door close behind me. The sound echoed through the hall, hollow but clean. Mara waited near the doorway, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "Feels lighter," she said. I nodded, taking a slow look around. The furniture was exactly where it had always been, yet smaller somehow, as if time had stripped it of power. The same chair Father used to sit in, the same curtains Mother had sewn years before. But they no longer carried accusation. They were just things now. Quiet, neutral, free. I walked to the living room and ran my hand along the edge of the table. The grain of the wood was smoother than I remembered. "You did this," Mara said softly. "You brought it back." I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "It brought me back." We both laughed a little. Soft, nervous laughter that came from exhaustion more than joy. The light through the window had changed since last I stood here. It used to feel filtered and dim, like it was sneaking in. Today, it fell openly across the floorboards. I placed the envelope with the deed on the table. It wasn't a trophy. It was proof that truth could outlast deceit. "We're done hiding," I said quietly. Mara's eyes watered, though she didn't cry. "He'd be proud," she whispered. I looked around, taking in the house as if I were seeing it through his eyes, less as a structure, more as a story made solid. "He built this to last," I said. "He didn't know how right he was." In the kitchen, the cupboards were mostly empty. I'd sold a few things after the judgment to cover expenses, but what remained was enough. A kettle, a plate, a chair. I ran the water, waited for it to warm, and watched steam rise from the sink. "It's strange," I said, "how silence changes its meaning." Mara tilted her head. "How so?" I turned off the tap. "It used to mean defeat. Now it just means peace." She smiled. "You'll fill this house again." I looked at her, surprised. "With people?" "Maybe not right away," she said, "but with life, laughter, even if it's just yours for now." I sat at the kitchen table. The chair creaked beneath me, but it held. "I used to think keeping this place meant clinging to the past," I said. "Now I see it means facing it." She nodded slowly. "And forgiving it, maybe." I didn't answer. Forgiveness still felt like a language I hadn't learned. Outside, the afternoon light softened, spilling through the window in long stripes. I noticed the old keychain Father had carved, a small wooden tag shaped like a house. I turned it over in my palm, reading the faded letters of his initials. "He'd fix the loose hinge on the porch every spring," I said. "Said a door should never squeak when it's meant to open." Mara chuckled quietly. "Then we should fix it again." I smiled. "Tomorrow." She gathered her things and left me standing in the living room. The floorboards groaned under her steps, not in protest, but like an old habit. When the door closed behind her, I stood in the center of the house, listening. The refrigerator clicked on, the wind brushed against the windows, and for the first time those sounds felt like belonging. I sat down in Father's chair. The cushion had flattened over the years, molded by use. Through the open window I could hear faint laughter from a house down the street. It blended with the creak of branches outside, the kind of quiet noise that makes you aware of your own breathing. I looked around once more. The walls, the table, the envelope with the deed still resting where I left it. Everything that mattered was still here, just stripped of fear. Every corner of this house had seen lies, tears, and truth, but it had endured. So had I. As the day faded into evening, I whispered to the room, "We're home." But one voice still echoed in my mind. "He'll never choose you," she'd said once. She was right. He didn't. For a long time, I believed that was the ending. I carried those words like a wound that refused to close. But standing here now, years later, the echo feels softer, almost distant. The old ring box sat on the dresser, the velvet worn thin at the edges. I opened it slowly, half expecting the past to sting again. The diamond had dulled, its shine buried under time, but the lesson inside gleamed clearer than ever. I remembered the day he gave it to me. We were younger, both pretending that promises meant permanence. "It's simple," he'd said, "but it's honest." It wasn't. It was the start of a quiet lie we both agreed to live in. When he left, I told myself it was betrayal. Now I know it was release. The morning light crept through the curtains, brushing the mirror across the room. I hadn't looked at that mirror for months. It used to hold every version of me I didn't want to see. The woman waiting, the woman doubting, the woman shrinking to fit his shadow. But today, the reflection looked different. Not younger, not prettier, just still, present, mine. I ran a finger along the edge of the mirror, tracing where dust had gathered. "You can stop now," I whispered to the version of myself still holding on. The house was quiet, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. I thought of all the choices I'd made out of fear, staying too long, forgiving too quickly, apologizing for existing too loudly. Each one had built a cage disguised as love. Lena once told me, "Some people don't betray you. They reveal you." I hadn't understood her then. Now I do. His betrayal didn't ruin me. It showed me the shape of my endurance. I picked up the ring, turned it in the light, and smiled faintly. "You taught me what I'd never settle for again," I said. The words didn't taste bitter. They tasted final. Outside, a clock from the nearby church struck 9. Time used to feel like an enemy. Every passing hour reminded me of what I'd lost. But this morning, it sounded like rhythm, steady, inevitable, merciful. I placed the ring back in the box, closed it gently, and tucked it into the drawer beneath old letters and receipts. Some things don't need to be thrown away to lose their power. They just need to be seen clearly. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee. The smell was sharp, grounding. Across the street, neighbors were leaving for work, waving, living ordinary mornings. I envied them once for that. Now I was one of them, someone whose day started without sorrow as the first thought. The mirror caught the sunlight again, scattering it across the room. For a moment, I let it hit my face. I didn't look away. People say closure comes with forgiveness, but I don't believe that anymore. Closure came with truth. The truth that love without honesty isn't love at all. It's dependency dressed as devotion. And I'd lived under that costume long enough. I thought of the letter I never sent, the apology I never got, the countless ways I'd replayed the story, trying to rewrite its ending. None of it mattered now. The story wasn't his anymore. It was mine. I whispered once more, just to hear how it sounded out loud. "He never had to choose me." The words didn't hurt this time. They settled, simple and solid, like something finding its rightful place. Then, softer still, I added, "I chose myself." The echo filled the quiet room, and for the first time, it stayed where it belonged. Inside me, steady, certain. I chose myself, and it was enough. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me which city you're listening from. I read every comment. If the story touched you, you can support the channel with a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this every day. Your encouragement really helps. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what moment stayed with you. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's plenty more on the channel as well. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next life story with respect and gratitude.